Welcome to this latest edition of the Critical Conversations series on global finance for people and planet. My name is Heba Aly. I'm the CEO of the new Humanitarian. Across the Commonwealth, leaders of heavily indebted countries, civil society leaders, and those on the front lines of the climate crisis are calling for a systematic reform of the global financial architecture, and in particular, two things: debt restructuring and access to climate financing.
Debt levels are, in fact, at their highest levels now in 25 years. These unsustainable debts are undermining the ability of governments to be able to deliver essential public services like healthcare and education and addressing the climate crisis.
How really do we build that systematic resilience is basically what this is all about.
We need to see improvements to the G20 common framework. This initiative has failed to deliver the quick and the fair debt relief that's needed, while excluding countries that are in a debt crisis from actually accessing the process.
And ODA budgets are not going up. They're about $200 billion a year. For climate transformation, we need $2.4 trillion. And we need to break it down with different types of finance that can achieve this. So about half of what we need is stuff that generates money. Solar farms make money. Wind turbines make money. So we need to find a way of unblocking private investment in those things. Those private investors are not coming to the South. They're going to the North because of the imbalanced global financial system that Grieve was talking about earlier. It's a system of core and periphery, and the periphery is more volatile, and the cost of capital is very, very high. So we need to unblock the flow of capital by reducing the cost of capital.
And it's an interesting question. Is it reform or we start anew? The World Bank and the IMF, in as far as dealing with crisis, has done a terrible job. And this is why a lot of people from my part of the world are very excited, for example, about the new development bank, the BRICS Bank.
Matching the development agenda with the climate agenda and moving along in one trajectory.
Almost half of all debt repayments are owed to private lenders, but we have no mechanism in place at the moment in our global financial architecture to bring them to the table to negotiate a debt restructuring. When it comes to addressing the debt crisis, we need to strengthen international processes to ensure fair, responsive debt relief. And we also need to see commitments on grant-based climate financing.
We can get the private sector doing mitigation. We can get the development banks doing adaptation in climate vulnerable countries. And we need a definition of climate vulnerability that they can get concessional money, because we can't pay back this amount of debt if it's on normal terms. 50% of the increase of our debt relates to climate change and natural disasters. But the final thing, which we can't get the private sector to do, we can't get the development banks to do, is financing for loss and damage when we have a climate disaster. That has to be grants. And the ODA budgets aren't big enough. So we need new revenue sources, new taxes and levies on emissions, global taxes and levies emissions, falling the hardest on the well-off, which will be helping to finance loss and damage. And that's Bridgetown.
So I'm going to start turning to some of you in the audience, and we'll be sharing a document on screen that helps document a bit of what we're hearing. Again, what steps or actions do you think Commonwealth finance ministers should focus on as they tackle reform of the global financial system in order to address the twin challenges of climate change and development?
I'm listening to this conversation. I keep asking myself, where do we fit the grassroots people and the people that I work in, the young people, Indigenous people, people with disability, when we talk about finance?
There are 10 Commonwealth countries which have a debt to GDP ratio of over 100%. At least 3 of them are actually in the Paris Club of creditor nations. But if the Commonwealth could put together those nations in the Commonwealth which have problems with debt, then that would be a really useful collective decision of Commonwealth finance ministers.
More funds in the GCF Adaptation Fund, GEF, easier access to those funds, and finally, the opportunity for the Commonwealth to take the lead, help our countries basically to translate our NDCs, NAPs, which are, for all extent, just expressions of intent, translate them into portfolios for investment projects, and then look at Commonwealth investment in adaptation and mitigation. We start with the easy one, in mitigation.
Special drawing rights are an IMF resource that least 2 years ago were the largest release of these financial resources in the history of the institution. And it was the result of civil society organizations from around the world advocating for years for them to be released. These special drawing rights don't have to be paid back. They're not loans, and they don't have any strings attached. There are no conditionalities. So this is a way that countries can get resources rapidly in a very efficient way to help make financial space for dealing with the impact of the climate crisis.
Thank you for the contributions from the floor. It's really great to hear other voices in this space and to sort of broaden out the debate. It'd be good for the Commonwealth finance ministers to prioritise this continued conversation at COP28, especially on the loss and damage fund, to ensure that that is properly operationalised, but also properly funded, so that we are talking about grants and not loans coming from the new loss and damage fund that was announced last year. And in the long run, I think we need the Commonwealth finance ministers to actively support and work towards a UN debt workout mechanism in order to create an independent, fair and responsive process that is inclusive of all creditors, to ensure that the debt restructuring that is needed by countries that are in a debt crisis can actually take place in a fair and independent way.
When we restructured our private debt, we put natural disaster clauses in all of the new debt. So whenever there's a disaster, there is a 2-year freeze on interest payments and principal payments. We believe that that's one of the ways of reforming the global financial system, making it more shock absorbing. This should be not just in the MDB debt, in the development bank debt. It should also be in private debt. What we need to do is change the underlying structure. And I think the way to do that is through trade and through economics, not actually through finance and debt. There's a limit to what we can do there if we don't change the fundamental economic system.
I have a lot of hope in the Commonwealth. The fact that it's one of the few, groupings where we have a global South dominance. I think there's power there, and there's opportunities there for organizing, mobilizing, articulating, and I think that's how I see it.
We are Commonwealth citizens, and therefore we want the Commonwealth to work. It needs this collective power to push from the inside. That's really where our strength lies.
This has been eye-opening, and as many of you have said, very rich. I know we didn't get to everyone who wanted to speak. Thank you so much to all of you for your inputs and thoughts. I know there are a range of opinions, and I think it's a very healthy part of the process to air them out and interrogate them. So thank you for doing that today, and goodbye.